Hey, it's Manic and Chill. Scott wanted me to open the show for once because I never do, because I'm terrible at it. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed that, but if you've ever listened to me on Dynasty Trades HQ, I don't know what to say to start. So we took last week off because life happens sometimes. Bad things happen, and good people can't get on the mic because they're too busy dealing with life. But this week we're back, and I guess I should say hi to you first and introduce my partner at Charles Chill FFB. I just call him Scott. I honestly, I don't even think I remembered his handle till right now. I just Scott. It's Scott. What's up, Scott?
Well, luckily the handle is right below my heavily bearded face. This is about 3 weeks into this beard, and I'm already sick of it. But yeah, man, glad to be back. I know we missed last week, but I did try to let everybody know. I think I sent out a tweet and just said, "Hey, we'll be back this week." So we're back and have a fun topic. What are we? Less than 3 weeks from opening day, right?
Yeah,
Yesterday
we
would
were.
have been 3 weeks from like the first main Sunday of the season. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So it's happening. It's really going to happen. So it's super exciting.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think some of the most actionable stuff that we can talk about right now is you've had all off season to trade. You've had all off season to do your drafts and whatever. I mean, yeah, it's redraft season too, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that are doing their home leagues and all that kind of stuff. But I think one of the more actionable things you can do over the next couple weeks we have on the slate for today. So glad to be back with you, and let's hear the topic. I'm sure everyone's dying to hear what it's going to be.
So yeah, we sent out a bat signal asking folks if they wanted to help us with a topic, and as soon as you did that, I was like, "Oh no, screw that! I thought of a topic, just a fun one, just some strategy involved, I guess. What your perfect roster construction looks like, um, not specific to players, more player types. I think everyone that listens to us kind of knows. Well, even though I do fawn over specific players. I do my best to fight that urge and build around player types. And I know you definitely are way more process oriented than me. You're like a machine. There's no heart involved at all. Like I look at DJ Moore like someone, like as a part of a family, my family, and DJ Moore is just a guy to you. But yeah, so that's what I thought it'd be kind of fun to get into this week. And, I know we talk a lot about Superflex because we're Dynasty super nerds, and that's what we do. We play Superflex because that's what we do. But a lot of people just play single quarterback. So I don't want to get them the short shrift. I don't know if that's the proper term. And maybe we'll start off with a single QB team. Like, what would your, let's say, a normal vanilla team league, 9 starters, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. What do you got? 3, 2, and 2. I think that's how the math works out usually. 3, 2 plus 2 is 5, 7, 9. Yes. 3, 2, and 2. 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and 2 flex.
Oh,
So I
you
mean,
need one of those. You need one of those whiteboards behind you where you can make sure you count.
I
So you get
do.
to 9 accurately.
If I got a pen on me, I'll just write on the wall. I mean, it's an apartment, so whatever. I can paint when I leave. So I think we'll start with you because you're more process oriented than I am. I try to be, but I know my heart leads me astray sometimes.
Well, I mean, when you brought this topic to me, I think I sent you 3 or 4 texts back. Like, okay, we need to have caveats. We need to lay out specific parameters because we could take this. When you say what's the ideal roster construction, I'm going to ask you 5 questions before I can even come up with an answer. So I think, you laid out the 9 starters. First thing in single quarterback leagues is clearly the scarcity is not going to be there at quarterbacks. There's only 12 starting in the league, no matter what. So it doesn't matter. And I'm sure I don't play in a lot of single quarterback leagues anymore, but I remember some of the ones, back 3 years ago, I probably played in half a dozen single quarterback leagues at least. And I remember, some of the deeper leagues, even if they're one quarterback, if you start going to 25, 30 roster spots, you just have teams by default that are holding like 5 quarterbacks. And it's kind of annoying because you can't pick them up and stream off the waiver wire like you can in a redraft league, right? But you also know they're not worth anything. So, like, what is the sweet spot price where I still have to pay to pry away one of those quarterbacks from you. Even though, Dwayne Haskins is your 5th quarterback, you're never using him unless literally everybody else just collapses before the games. But I still have to pay you something. And that shouldn't be something that you have to do based on the scarcity. So I think the first thing, not to go down the rabbit hole of how many roster spots, but I think you do have to look at, especially if this is a league you've been in for a couple years, you have to look at what is the total amount of roster spots compared to the starters, right? If there's only 20 roster spots, there's going to be quarterbacks that become available. Now, it may not be quarterback twos. A lot of those will probably be rostered, but you probably are going to see the real low end, Ryan Fitzpatrick's, Andy Dalton's, like those types that if they start, they're not going to be players that other teams are just going to hoard because they really have no standalone value and they don't have any long-term value. They're more situational. So I think that would be the first thing is if it's shallower rosters, I look at it like this. Once you've determined the roster spots and once you've determined, okay, do I need to hold backup quarterbacks just in case they fall into starting spots, just in case I ever need to use them? The next thing you have to look at is the scoring. How much do the quarterbacks score compared to the other positions? Because only 9 starters. I mean, are you in any leagues where it's like the quarterbacks are scoring 30 plus points per game? And even though there's only one or there's one in a super flex, it's like, man, if I have a big advantage at quarterback, that's a much bigger difference than advantage at tight end or receiver or running back. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. I only so I'm only in one league left, I think, or maybe 2 that have single quarterbacks, and the only guys that made a significant impact like that are the onesies every year, where it was Lamar Jackson last year, Patrick Mahomes the year before that, and actually Carson Wentz the year before that. I know people don't want to think he's good, but he was. But for the most part, no, they're not making a huge difference. Now, that's not to say, obviously, I much rather have the QB6 than the QB30 every week.
Right.
But the difference in scoring between that from the RB6 to the RB30 is going to be a lot closer at the quarterback position. The only way I guess I would ever roster 5 quarterbacks, but I've seen guys do it in single quarterback leagues, is if we have, say, 16 teams, even if it's 8-point scoring for quarterbacks, just because I have a bunch of quarterbacks doesn't make them valuable. It's the same kind of thing we run into when we do 2 tight ends, where everybody hoards tight ends, even the bad ones. And you're like, but he's still terrible. It doesn't matter that you have to start 2. Like 6 of the guys you have on your roster are useless. Just like you were saying, like Dwayne Haskins, who, eventually could be okay. And I think will be good, but that's for Superflex. But when you're hoarding guys like Mitch Trubisky, you're just wasting roster space. And
to be fair, if you're talking a 16-team single quarterback league, that probably has closer to the scarcity of, I don't think it's quite 12-team Superflex, but that probably has the scarcity of like a 10-team Superflex, where I think quarterbacks tend to be overvalued when you hear Superflex, but then you think it's only 10 teams. I mean, do the math. There's only going to be 20 in the lineup in any given week. So, I mean, yeah, everyone can, in theory, roster 3, and there's still a couple that are left over, in terms of NFL starters. So I think you do have to look at those things first. What are the specs? How many teams? How many roster spots? If you're looking at, let's just call it 12 teams, 1 quarterback, 20 roster spots. That's basically like what you have in the FFPC. Now you have like a defense and a kicker, right? But you have enough bench spots to where you can hold a couple players, but it really doesn't make sense to do it at quarterback. So, if you don't have one of those guys that's a difference maker, then to me, the best way to go about it is I don't want to use too many roster spots because I'm probably losing some value, especially this year. We talked about this on the past show. I want to carry as many running backs as I can this year, just in case, the next man up, I want as many as I can. But I think you can get away with getting 2 quarterbacks that maybe, and we don't have any of this data right in front of us, but there's people that crunch the numbers and say, well, hey, based on this schedule and that schedule, it may be good to pair these 2. I mean, that's more of a redraft thing, but even in Dynasty, it's pretty easy to swap from, you can make a deal in a single quarterback league and go from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford. I mean, what do you really have to pay to, you could probably get a deal like that if you overpay. You could get the quarterbacks that you wanted as long as they're kind of in that second or third tier. But I think that's the way to combat it. I think as you expand roster spots where it's likely that you're not going to be able to just pick up, the quarterback twos off of waivers, I think you have to consider rostering more. But I think ideally the scenario that we're talking about here, I think getting two kind of like low end quarterback ones, high end quarterback twos, and playing the matchups, you can almost hack your way to like a mid to low quarterback one performance most weeks if you just pick between the two. So that's what I would say. I think for 20-man rosters, I think two probably top 18 quarterbacks would be ideal.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think some of it, and I don't want to say laziness because that's not probably the word I really want to use, but I think a lot of it is a lot in leagues as you draft teams and you go, I don't want to have to think about it. I don't. True. I want to draft. If I draft a superstar at this position, I don't have to worry about it ever again. It's just going to be I'm going to throw him Mahomes every week. So what? I drafted him way too early in the 4th round of a Dynasty single QB league. I'm still doing it. But for some reason, that same concept doesn't seem to dawn on people that like, well, you're going to have the same decisions to make at other positions that are more valuable that you should be filling those roster spots. Like, even redraft leagues, I have problems with when they draft a quarterback. I end up drafting them usually after everyone else because I'm like, yeah, I'll live with Jared Goff. I'll live with Matthew Stafford. I'll live with Daniel Jones. I have no problem with that. And, I'll load up at the other positions. Like I'd rather go tight end in the 1st round, like a George Kittle than a quarterback in the first 3-4 rounds in a dynasty startup. So let's talk about that fun onesie position. In a onesies, what's your tight end strategy? So mine is simple. It's just I'm going to overpay for either Kittle, Ertz, Kelsey, or Andrews. And then I'm just going to have guys like Noah Fant that I'll overdraft too. Which, I'm higher on Noah Fant than a lot of people. So I'll draft him a round or two early and be okay with that. But I know some people are like, oh, well, just stream it, which is, I get tired of hearing just stream it for everything because everyone can't hit on a stream. If that's, right. If 6 of the people in your league are running that same concept, well, I'm just going to stream. Well, okay. Not everyone's going to be able to pick up, the same guy. Unless it's copy league and it's much different than the type of league we're talking about right now. But anyway, I'm sorry. I digressed way off the topic. You can't stream. Everyone can't stream. It can't happen. I know you can stream. You can stream certain positions. But the chances of actually hitting it at them are what I always wonder about. And then anyway, back to tight end. Sorry.
No, you kind of hit on a point when you're talking about the tight ends because it is a onesie position. And this can apply to even if you have a league where you have to start a kicker and a defense. You're kind of taking the same approach. And, if you're like Shane and I specifically, now mostly the leagues we play in are either super flex or, I play in a ton of FFPC redraft leagues, but I have the same fatigue that you just mentioned. Let's say this year we're doing 24 FFPC high stakes leagues, right? Now, I would be lying if I said that I wanted every single week of setting those lineups to be, oh yeah, we just streamed. You know what I mean? We have some mix of teams where, it makes sense just to take Kittle in the 1st round. It makes sense to take Mark Andrews in the 2nd or Zach Ertz in the 3rd, just because there can be some fatigue when you're just saying, well, hey, I'm just going to take 3 tight ends and I'm just going to stream. I'm just going to take 8 receivers and I'm just going to pick the best 3 or 4 every week. Like, there's only so many decisions you can make without just driving yourself crazy. So I get where you're coming from when you say, I'm just going to take Mahomes because he's starting every week, no matter if he's playing the Broncos on the road or he's playing the Dolphins at home. Like he's in my lineup every single week. And I think what you have to do when you ask about the tight ends, you have to do a little math. I mean, I know people not everybody loves math. And if you don't have a whiteboard like Shane, it could drive you completely crazy. But, for instance, let me give you this example. If the average quarterback in your league is scoring 20 points per game, but Patrick Mahomes is scoring 30, you're getting a 50% advantage on the average team, right? Just by playing Mahomes. If he hits his average, the league average, you're getting a 50% advantage over the league. That makes sense? Now, the same thing with, let's say the tight ends are scoring 15 points per game on average, if it's a tight end premium. But then you have Travis Kelce and he's at 21 points per game. You're getting a 40% advantage against the rest of the league. So it would make sense to prioritize that advantage at quarterback over the tight end, just simply because it's both a onesie position and, which advantage is worth more. 50% of, the 20 for 30 is worth 10 more points. Whereas at tight end, it's only worth 6. So you're getting a better advantage at the quarterback and you're getting more points. So if you look at it that way, you have to do some math. And this can differ on your scoring. If you have a hyper tight end premium league, but then you have a really super depressed quarterback scoring league, great. Mahomes might be an advantage, but maybe he's only a 4-point advantage, whereas a tight end could give you an 8-point advantage. So you can look, and I know there's some resources out there. You've had some people on your show that have simply just talked about, based on your scoring, you can just take the best value in the draft, and that'll kind of guide you through. But, I think you do have to look at it that way. I think tight end, I think, is harder to stream when you're really trying to hit on if you're going to stream, you have to stream within like the second or third tiers of tight ends, right? If you're punting and you're trying to stream between like 3 tight ends that are outside the top 20, like, good luck. Because a lot of times that can just be like who caught a touchdown, and that's really hard to predict. Whereas quarterbacks, if you're a starting NFL quarterback, even if it's Mitch Trubisky, Tyrod Taylor, Ryan Fitzpatrick, you probably have a pretty good idea of when to play those guys. The matchups are a little more evident with quarterbacks. So I think quarterbacks are easier to stream, but I do think most leagues, the tight end it's easier to knock that out. It's less stressful, I guess, is what I would say, to stream the tight ends. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in Dynasty, I'm not a big fan of, let's say I hit on a Lamar Jackson and I have him now and I can trade him for literally a top 12 running back. I have a hard time not doing that and then just figuring out the streaming from there. So I think that's the biggest thing is, once you hit on one of these positions in Dynasty, if you're in a single quarterback league, do you just cash out and hit the reset button and just take the value? Like if you have a Kittle or you have a Mahomes, are you trading at like the, mid second round startup price and trying to get like a stud running back?
That's supposed to be what you do, right? That's the move.
It
should be the move. It's a lot easier to say it than do it. Especially in a lot of the leagues that we play in, because everyone kind of knows, everyone thinks along the same lines of everything you just said. And I've gotten to the point where I don't like trading hammers. Like if I have a sledgehammer, I don't want to trade it. I want to keep it and I want to smash you in the face with it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trade you these little pin push pins. There you go. Push pins. Trade up those to get another hammer. Because a lot of my rosters, it's old school studs and duds. Like I don't care about my bench usually, because one, I don't want to have to choose because I'm bad at it. So if I have to choose between Marquise Brown and Calvin Ridley week to week, I'm going to pick the wrong guy every week without fail. But if I say have, just Julio Jones and Devontae Adams, and, after that, I like when the choices make themselves. So I'm big on just keeping the hammers. Now, quarterback is a little different because I will trade those guys down, but because I still think there's an efficiency in the market, because I think people look at Mahomes and they look at Lamar Jackson and go, all right, well, these guys are so far above everyone else. When really Mahomes was in his rookie, his first season playing, and Lamar was last year, but Wentz was 4 points better than his next competitor the year before that. It's always a quarterback like that. So I love making trades where I'm trading, say if I'm going to trade Mahomes, I'll trade Mahomes for Dak and something. But at tight end, because it's so super scarce, where I can't do that. I can't. There's no way that I know that if I could trade Kittle for Andrews and something, okay, but no one's going to do that. If I want to trade Kittle, I'm going to have to trade Kittle for a question mark like Evan Ingram and then something. And just, with the running backs, I'm still going to get my running backs through the rookie draft. That's really where I want to get them. My big name guys, I'm not going to usually pay up for them in a trade. I'm going to make a lot of moves where I get guys like Jordan Howard and Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman and try to roll them out there as my second or third running back. So I wouldn't trade a stud tight end like George Kittle for probably, depending now which running back we're talking about, obviously, but probably you get to about running back 7 before I really start to think about it.
Well, and it's funny because you mentioned, I'm not going to trade Kittle down for Evan Ingram, but if you just look at I could ask you right now, Shane, Evan Ingram, Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, Mike Gesicki, Irv Smith, Jonnu Smith. Out of all those guys, you predict, and you can throw Chris Herndon in there too. You predict which 2 could potentially be this year's Darren Waller, or you know what I mean? It can come from any of those guys. Yeah. So part of the value with those guys in Dynasty is almost everybody I named on that list, we've seen something significant from them by the age of 23, 24. Some of them aren't even that age yet, but they're valued there. Very rarely are tight ends valued where they are because of their just sheer production. A lot of times it's well, what if this happens? This is the cost you have to pay for, there's so many what ifs that could raise Dallas Goedert's value tomorrow, but there's probably a good chance that it's going to go up in the next year or 2, but you're already paying that price. So, you could definitely get burned if you go from Travis Kelce or George Kittle to Dallas Goedert, and someone else just has, Irv Smith and Noah Fant. They could blast you at tight end this year, and they didn't pay hardly anything to get there. They just picked the right 2, and if they pick the right matchups, that kind of goes into what you said about, do I really want to make a decision at every single position week to week? I wanted to bring this up because it applies. One popular strategy this year in FFPC, and I know that's a little different because it's tight end premium, but teams that have the 101, they'll take Christian McCaffrey on the turn at the 2-3. They will take Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, and then they will reach and take the best kicker and the best defense. Now, they probably overpaid from an ADP standpoint on all of those picks except for Christian McCaffrey, right? But here's their logic is they locked up a top 3 starter spot at all 5 of those positions. So basically they can say every week, in theory, assuming Andrews is a top 3 tight end, assuming McCaffrey and Jackson repeat, assuming they can pick whether it's Buffalo or the Chargers, whatever defense they pick and whatever kicker they pick, that's going to be top 3. Easier said than done. But their logic is, hey, I locked in a top 3 player at 5 of the 10 starting spots. I'll figure out the rest. You know what I mean? That's the logic of that. And it's risky, but I can understand the logic of, hey, just starting even with the McCaffrey, Andrews, Jackson, I locked in a quarterback, a running back, and a tight end that are top 3 at their position. And we've talked before, if there's one position you can kind of just figure it out, it's receiver, right?
Yeah.
So they'll go through and say, okay, the next 4 or 5 rounds, I will just build a receiver core of a bunch of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s, 6 or 7 of them, and I'll just play the best 4 every single week. And those are my flexes. And, if Jackson and McCaffrey and Andrews repeat and you just are able to pick 4 solid receivers, that team's going to be hard to beat. The issue is in a tournament like that, I think 35% of the teams already have built that way. So once you get to the actual money round, you're facing out of 400 teams, you're facing 100 that have the same players. So it's you better have the right receivers and secondary running backs that hit. Otherwise, you're not going to probably win. It's kind of like an old, DFS logic. You want to have some uniqueness in your build. And because that's been so popular, I don't know if it's the best way to go about it. So it kind of comes into just the league that you're in. You have to see if everyone's doing it the same way. If everyone's streaming, maybe you want to pay up for the advantage. That was my whole point.
Yeah, no, I got you. And I'm me in Dynasty, I always do this in trades when I'm like, look, I don't care. I'm going to overpay, I'll overpay today for Juju. Or a year ago, I'll overpay today for DJ Moore because I'm not going to be chasing him 3 years down the road. Now, am I going to get burned? Sometimes, yes. I'm going to end up with a guy like Sammy Watkins where it looked like, all right, this guy's going to be a world beater, but it's still, I'll take that risk there to pay a little bit more right now than trying to pay for Julio Jones at the height of his superpowers. I could get Julio Jones now for a random first, but if we look back a couple years ago when he was still young, in his mid 20s, you're talking 2 firsts, 3 firsts. I came up in the days when you used to give up 3 firsts for a superstar player in dynasty leagues. That's kind of shifted. Like Odell Beckham, a couple years ago, you would have had to pay 3 firsts for him. So, yeah, I hate streaming. It's not because I'm lazy, because me, I everywhere I've ever written, I've written waiver wire articles. So I know how to dig in and find the guys out of the trash heap that you can use and get your 10 points. It's just those 10 points are meaningless to me. In the range of outcomes, it's great. 10 points. 10 points isn't going to win or lose a week. Most of the time, it's going to be the guy that goes off for 40. But some weeks he's going to give me 0. Like Marquise Brown is going to kill me a bunch of times this year. I already know it. I'm okay with that. Streaming. I hate streaming at quarterback. Although I'll stream within my own roster, like you were talking about. If I have 2 quarterbacks, easiest setup was back in the day. You used to be able to play Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees. You'd play one on the road or one at home, and then hope the other guy was home the next week. The splits aren't as bad, and both the guys have fallen off a little bit, obviously, and Roethlisberger didn't play a lot last year. You can stream effectively, but when you're building, man, you just build hammers. Like, I hate depth. I think depth is pointless. Not pointless. That's a bad way to state it. You're going to end up with depth. This is something that I tweeted out not that long ago, is a lot of the players that you're going to draft thinking are going to be your wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s, or even trade for, those are going to end up being your depth pieces. So I don't want to go trade for a guy that I go, well, he's depth. Deontay Johnson one day could be a wide receiver 2, 3, maybe 2, maybe, I guess, is his upside. Screw that. I'll trade him away. Let me go get Tyler Lockett. And, because he's a guy that I know on any given week can give me 40 points. I don't see that in Deontay Johnson's range of outcomes. And if it happens, it's because something terrible has happened to Juju Smith-Schuster. And most of my teams are decimated anyway. I don't remember what the original point was, but yeah, I don't like streaming, and I'll overpay for players. And don't worry about depth. Depth is going to come. And like I said, depth is just going to be the guys that you thought were going to be wide receiver 1s and 2s, and they're just not going to be, because everyone can't be a wide receiver 1 and 2, or a running back 1 and a running back 2. It's physically impossible. There's only so many of those slots, and only so many of the players can do it. Although, as you've noted repeatedly, there was 75 different wide receivers that had wide receiver 1 weeks last year or something ridiculous like that.
Well, but here's the thing: is
worrying about depth to me is one of those things that never makes sense to me. Like, I trade it for depth. So in my mind, when you say that, I'm saying, oh, okay, so you trade it to lose. Like, you trade it to be mediocre. Okay.
Well, and I think that you kind of contradicted. You didn't contradict yourself, but the ideas that you brought up are, most of the listeners are probably not playing in the number of leagues that you and I are playing. I mean, we're in triple digits if you add our leagues up, which is kind of scary at this point. But the thing is, though, when you're in so many leagues, even if you're not in a lot of leagues, if you are following, especially if you're in a dynasty league where, let's just say it's 25-man rosters, and we have about 5 minutes to talk some super flex, but let's just say it's 25-man rosters. If you just kind of play the news cycle that we hear all off season, like once you get to like 2 standard deviations out, all the players are worth the same. There's that cutoff where, okay, this guy's not worth a 3rd round pick. It's like there's a 3rd round pick. We talked about this last time. Like, what players would you trade for a 3rd? After that, it's just like everybody else, right? He may be worth a 3rd to me because I like him, and I want a 3rd if I have to trade him away because I want to have him as my 24th player on my team. But he's not worth a 3rd to anybody else because the acquisition cost is higher than what his value is to my team. So you're always going to be able to find depth. If you're hardcore enough into Dynasty, you can go out and find, okay, this guy's getting buzz in training camp. He's on all my waiver wires. Let me pick him up. Technically, that's depth. The depth has very little value. A lot of times it's just, I like this guy. I like his profile. I'm going to hold him for the next 6 months just to see. Like, that's depth to me. You might look at my team and say, yeah, dude, that guy needs to go to the waiver wire. He's never going to be anything. So a lot of times, like, the true depth in Dynasty is like, it's just personal preference. And so you can easily build that all the time. Almost every waiver wire, no matter how deep, I can find guys that I like just because I do follow it that close. And I know you do too. So real quick, super flex perspective, it changes a little bit. And I think that, when it comes to quarterbacks, I want to get your thoughts on this because the one thing you said, like you don't like to stream, one benefit you can have by not having to stream within your own roster, what does that mean? You have more spots you can actually open up to take true chances at your weaknesses, right? So, for instance, this year in Superflex, we talked about this on prior shows. Superflex leagues, I want to have as many backup quarterbacks as I can. If anything, just to keep you from being able to bail yourself out if you have an injury. So I think in single quarterback leagues, I almost like the advantage this year. If I can roll out that roster that I said, where it's like I'm setting and forgetting 5 spots every week where those guys are just playing, I'm not trying to platoon, Mark Andrews, Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, they're never getting platooned. They're just playing every week, no matter what. That actually allows me, 3 extra roster spots. I can use those on whatever position in that league is scarce. So from a Superflex perspective, what are you doing differently? Let's just call it a 12-team, 25-man roster where there is some tightness on roster spots. You can't just hold 6 backup quarterbacks plus your 3 or 4 starters, right? You can't allocate 40% of your team to quarterbacks. What are you doing differently in leagues like this? Like your last couple cuts, what positions are you prioritizing this year?
Well, this year, keeping every quarterback I can. So,
like, how deep are you going there? Like, are you going half the backups in the league, or because I mean, you can get to a point where it's like, do I really want to drop Ty Montgomery for Jeff Driscoll? Like, that's the kind of
So no, I'm not moving down to Jeff Driscoll because I think I can if it gets to the point where I'm starting him, he's giving me 10 to 11 points. It's not worth a roster spot. It's not.
Or he's not good enough that you don't mind just fighting for him on the waiver wire for $10 if you really needed him, right?
Yeah. Okay. And he'll be out there. And if it's that desperate again, where Jeff Driscoll's are starting, then the world's going crazy again, like last year, and I'm going to be starting.
He produced for a couple weeks last year.
He did. But then, we talk about streaming, quarterbacks too, and then you'll think about like Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges last year, where it was just brutal. Like
Luke Falk, you put him in the lineup, he gave you negative.
Yeah. You put guys like that in and you're like, oh, okay, quarterbacks are so valuable. But even still in a league like this, for this year, I'll probably go a little more quarterback heavy. I'm probably going at least 4 or 5. Most years I'm content with 3. I'm like, look, I usually have a hammer starter. I overpaid for Wentz, or I got Kyler Murray. I overpaid for him, or I bought Baker on the cheap because apparently he's terrible after one bad year. And then the second quarterback is going to be a guy just like that. It's probably going to be like a lot of my teams. It's Wentz and Baker, or it's Wentz and Kyler. And I guess Kyler should be the headliner there. So Kyler and Wentz. So I guess they're different tiers. So more like a Wentz tier that, we've talked about before, where I think you throw Joe Burrow in there a little bit. Some people might throw Daniel Jones in there, Josh Allen. Any of those 2, I'm fine with. And then my third, I'm usually going to get another low end backup, or at least, a low end starter as a backup. I would say a guy like Mitch Trubisky, except this year there's Nick Foles to deal with. But Phil Rivers, I don't think he's going to be super great, but I think he'll give you 15 to 16 points a week. And then I'm trying to handcuff most of my starters. Most of the leagues I have Carson Wentz in, I now have his true life backup, not Sudfeld. And I would do the same if I knew who the backup was in Kansas City, because apparently it's not Matt Moore, it's Chad Henne, I guess.
Henne. Yep.
Yeah. So whoever the backup is to that quarterback, definitely get them. And look, I'm not gonna devote 10 roster spots to the quarterback position, just because I'm gonna need running backs. We know that the running back's the position where someone's going to go down because of injuries. Last year was an outlier where everyone was healthy. This year is looking like it's going to be, a massacre on 34th Street because of COVID and just the way things work. There weren't a lot of injuries at the position last year. You can almost bank on it that there will be a lot of positions there this year. Go skinny. You talk about this a lot, and Jordan McNamara talks about it all the time, is going skinny at wide receiver, because I can find we've talked about, we can find those guys on the wire. And even tight end, I'll have my heavy tight end. I got my one hammer. And then after that, I can find guys on the waiver wire as much as I don't want to. And they'll only give me, 5 or 6 points. But I'd rather load up at running back and quarterback this year.
Yeah, and I think if you're it's different if you're in a league where there's 35 roster spots. You're probably mining the waiver wire, and I've slowly, as we've gotten more data coming out from training camps, I've slowly started to go in and say, okay, you ask yourself this question. You look at the quarterback list and say, if this guy got in the game, would one of two things be the case? One, I would ever want to play him. Even if I have more quarterbacks, would he ever be a guy that I say, okay, he's in the right system? He can run. He has a lot of weapons around him. Like, if any of those are true, you could maybe see a path where he could be in somebody's lineup. If it's Luke Falk from last year, no weapons, terrible team, can't run, I don't care if you pick him up and you have Darnold and he goes down. You can have him for free. Like, I dare you to start him against me. So if you really go through the backups, you can probably identify, 12 to 15 this year that you'd say, okay, yeah, like, I'm fine. Maybe I could play Robert Griffin one time. If he just runs Lamar Jackson's offense for 1 week, maybe he's playable. So that's a guy you could put on your list. We're not going to go through all the backups because we're out of time. But, those are the ones I'd prioritize this year. But, there's a fine line to where Shane said handcuff his quarterbacks. I kind of look at it as I would probably handcuff maybe my elite quarterback. And obviously, I would handcuff any quarterback that I think has standalone value. Like, I love getting shares of like Andy Dalton this year. Dude, if he started for Dallas half the year, I bet he'd probably be a top 15 quarterback just because of the system and the weapons that he has. But if you had to start Jeff Driscoll for 8 games, after a couple games, it'd probably be the situation where it's like, yeah, you can see why he's a career, 50th best quarterback in the league and has cycled around 4 teams in the last 5 years. So I think it really just kind of challenges your thought process this year. That'd be an exercise I'd tell everybody to do. The last takeaway, go through your leagues. If you're fighting for those last roster spots, if you can get up to like 30 players on your roster, answer the question every time you see a backup quarterback, answer your question. Like, is this offense one that could support, because Matt Moore historically is a terrible quarterback, but you know what? Put him in an Andy Reid offense for a couple weeks with his weapons. He could produce low-end quarterback 2 numbers if you're in a spot start. So just do that exercise. Go through and look at the backups and say, if in any scenario this guy had to play, could I really get a 3rd rounder from somebody? Or would it be enough of a block to keep him on a bench so that, Shane can't pick him up because he lost the starter? So that's what I would say this year at quarterbacks. Do the evaluation yourself. My evaluation might be different than yours, but I think that's where you have to start with the exercise. Any final thoughts?
No, man, you did great as usual. Lucky we get to do this show together. And that's all we got. And then, next week we'll be back again. Hopefully nothing else happens. And it's a good week and we'll be back. And let us know what you want us to talk about.
Give us
maybe
a topic.
We'll talk about it. Because this show's for you. Me and Scott could just talk to each other all night and day about fantasy football without the video. So if there's something you want us to talk about, let us know. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, same thing. And if you have any real specific topics, give us a little time in advance, and we'll actually do some serious prep work. Right?
Yep, definitely.
All right. Shane is the worst. Charles Chill, FFB, Dynasty Trades HQ, Dynasty and Chill. Catch you later, DLF.